Magandang araw, ako po si Dwight De Leon and welcome to Rappler Talk. The Philippines is entering the election season with a major caveat. The threat of COVID-19 remains. Tara po't kausapin ng Commission on Elections to know more about their efforts to ensure that next year's polls are pushing through. Hello and welcome to the show, Comelec spokesperson James Jimenez.
Hello, Dwight. Good
Director,
afternoon.
Director, you seem to be everywhere these days. You have podcasts on Facebook, you attend spaces on Twitter, you even make videos on TikTok, and you have a significant following. Is this your personal initiative, or is this a formal effort from Comelec to widen its reach?
Well, it's the way we define the work that we do. So in that respect, I guess it is very personal to us what we're doing, but at the same time, it serves the larger purpose. You also you forgot to mention I was also on Clubhouse last night, so yeah, there's that.
Sure. Yes, Director, but you've attended these social media events in the past months. What's your observation? What's your assessment so far? Are these voters more encouraged to vote in the coming elections?
Well, a lot of them are very eager to vote. And in fact, I think it's pretty safe to say that it looks like we will have a very good turnout in 2022. Again, judging from the engagement that we get, judging from the opinions that I hear being voiced at these forums, I think voters are really eager to go out and vote.
And I assume, sir, na yung visibility online also has something to do with your efforts to meet Comelec's target of new registered voters. Can we get an update? Where are we currently, Director?
Well, as far as new voters are concerned specifically, we have like about 1.6 million as of last week, 1.6 million. And so you add to that around 1.2 million coming from the SK, right? So right now we're at about 2.7, 2.8 million. With more than with several months left in the registration period, we end on September 30. It looks like we're actually in a good place to meet the targets that we set.
Pero as you've mentioned nga po, the quarantine restrictions in Metro Manila beginning late March also dealt quite a setback in the voter registration of Comelec. Have you discussed po a possible extension of the deadline? Is it still on the table?
No, actually, we haven't actually discussed an extension at any point. See, the thing is, even though NCR Plus has been on lockdown for, I think by now, maybe a month and a half, the rest of the country has actually gone on registering. So nawala lang sa atin yung NCR Plus. So at this point, there doesn't seem to be a massive need for extending the registration period. In any case, we're expecting to resume registration very soon as the quarantine conditions have improved.
This issue you acknowledged before. You acknowledged that one problem some voter applicants encountered was securing a schedule for biometrics online, seemingly
Yes.
clogged yung iRehistro. And has this issue been resolved given that we might expect an influx of applicants once the MECQ is over and as we near the deadline of voter registration?
Well, the issue has always been that a lot of people have actually logged online and they have snapped up the available slots. What we see now is that because registration is closed, all of these slots are suddenly free. Wala nagpaparehistro ngayon. So whether or not there'll be a lot of people such that they're going to snap up of all of these slots again, that's probably going to happen. Which is why we are also accepting walk-ins, no? So that people who have difficulty securing appointments don't have to fret. They can actually go to the Comelec office and on any afternoon they would be very welcome to register.
Director, let's now talk about the possible scenarios for 2022 because this is the first elections that we're conducting against the backdrop of a pandemic.
Yeah.
And I know you talked about this before, but for the sake of our viewers, is a no election scenario something that the public should be worried about?
They should be worried about people pushing a no election scenario. But whether or not a no election scenario is likely to happen, we are very firmly in the it is unlikely to happen category. Number one, Comelec sees no need to postpone or in any way cancel the elections simply because of the pandemic. All right. Uh, People tend to say, look at India, look at India, and Comelec has the power to suspend elections anyway. Comelec has this power to suspend elections, yes, but only when the conditions for free and fair elections no longer exist. Yung tinuturo nilang nangyayari sa India na nagkaroon ng surge, that happens afterwards, right? I mean, it is a consequence of holding the elections. But more importantly, it's not a consequence of holding the elections per se, it's a consequence of the behavior of the politicians participating in the elections. So, even from the basis of the comparison, it doesn't make sense. We can secure the elections. We can keep it safe. So there is no need to postpone the elections. And again, Comelec will most likely, most probably not use its power to suspend elections in that fashion.
Director, you've mentioned the experience of India in conducting their elections. Now,
Sure.
I recently talked to a political analyst in India who said that a lesson that the Philippines can learn from India is making sure that protocols are in place to punish or penalize politicians who will violate COVID-19 safety protocols. Because yun nga po sa India, we have Prime Minister Narendra Modi promoting, even attending these election gatherings with people of casual disregard for COVID protocols. So is that something that we can expect from Comelec, putting strict guidelines in place and punishing these politicians who violate the law?
Strict guidelines will be imposed. Yes, absolutely. Comelec will draft these guidelines. But the problem, you see, Dwight, is that for the most part, a lot of politicians, they see new rules or new guidelines coming out. Their knee-jerk reaction isn't let's comply. Their knee-jerk reaction is how do we get around these rules? And that's the biggest problem. Now, can we hold these politicians to account? Ideally, we should be able to. But my question is, have we been able to hold violators to account up to this point? Because if ordinary people are allowed to get away with violations, paano pa kaya yung mga politicians who are going to say, well, I'm doing this because it's my constitutional right to campaign. It boils down, I think, man, in the way our system has evolved, in the way our system is designed. It boils down really to individual responsibility. Candidates have to take responsibility for their actions. But more than that, voters have to hold politicians to account. You see a politician being irresponsible, well, don't vote for the guy. You see a politician casually disregarding COVID protocols, send the joker to loser heaven. Don't make them win. Because when you make them win, regardless of bad behavior, you are simply rewarding that bad behavior and making sure that it stays. You're making sure that it'll happen again and that it will always be a problem for the rest of the country.
Copy, Director. But going back, in terms of face-to-face campaigns, you have not ruled out anything. But what is the status of discussions? Because previously you said a ban is possible. You also said na some form of limited face-to-face campaigns is possible. What's the status of discussions?
Well, I don't know that I actually said that a ban is possible. In fact, if I did, though, I would like to correct that by saying that an outright ban would be unlikely, right? It would be unlikely. The reason is simple. The digital divide is simply too broad. to totally remove the possibility of in-person campaigning. However, there will be strict limitations, at least in guidelines, on the conduct of in-person campaigning. For instance, traditionally, we allow as many people as possible to join a rally. That can't happen anymore. There will have to be an attendance limit. Again, traditionally, once they're in the rally, they're pretty much free to do whatever they want. Again, that cannot happen anymore. There will have to be strict guidelines on distancing. One of the more, I guess, one of the more in-your-face changes that we're proposing is that we're proposing that food no longer be served at these events, that eating be prohibited from these rallies. Again, the logic is simple. If you can eat at the rally, then you take your mask off at the rally and then you spread droplets around, right? So it's a very common sense sort of regulation to say that you can't eat at the rally, right? So this is where we're going. This is the nature of the regulations that we're looking at. Obviously, we're going to discourage people from shaking hands and shaking babies. So wag ganon, right? I mean, and people will and politicians will have to accept that. I guess what we have to make very clear from the very beginning is that these rules are meant for the safety of the voter rather than the convenience of the politician. So if there's a conflict in interest between the convenience of a politician and the safety of the voter, we're going to weight it towards the voter.
And I assume, Director, meron ding time limit itong magiging mga campaign rallies na to, if ever.
We'll see if that's necessary. Mas importante yung attendance limits, I think. Because if there are like 3 of you and then you stay there all night, that's not going to be very unsafe. But if you have a lot of people, then it doesn't matter how quickly you're over. It doesn't matter how quickly you conclude the gathering. If there's a lot of you, then that's still dangerous. So it's more on the quantity or the number of people in the gathering.
Director, when can we expect Comelec to release formal guidelines on that? Meron na bang timetable?
Well, definitely before October. We want the guidelines to be out while the candidates are still preparing for the campaign period. Campaign period starts on February 7. February 8, if I'm not mistaken. But hindi naman tayo pwedeng maglabas ng guidelines 2 weeks before the start of campaigns. So let's hope for last quarter, best guess, October.
And Director, definitely because there will be some restrictions in face-to-face campaign, we're expecting that many politicians will be allocating their resources in social media. And we know that Comelec already took some steps in 2019 to regulate social media campaigning. Pero we also know that that social media is a different animal that's difficult to tame. So what steps are Comelec taking this time to ensure the fair conduct of the campaigns in 2022 polls?
Well, right now, with the tightening of in-person campaigning, it becomes necessary to ensure that online campaigning is a level playing field. See, the problem with social media or defining social media as a level playing field, it's not as simple as saying, since everyone can get on it, therefore it must be a level playing field, because that is not how it works. The mere fact that you can get on social media doesn't mean you can get as much effective use out of it, as one of those mega funded candidates. So that's where the challenge is. The challenge is to take a free platform and one that's been maximized to within a hilt of its potential, by some candidates, and to make it accessible at that same level to less well-funded candidates. That's the only way we can have a level playing field. If we can make sure that the level of utilization of social media is more or less equal all throughout. That's where Comelec will be focusing its attention. Um, True, we will continue to monitor social media use for expenses, for expenditures, but we will also have to do some things to help those who are not as well positioned to use social media.
Director, I'm just curious. When you released the guidelines in 2019, did you see violators and were they apprehended somehow?
Well, the whole idea of the guidelines in 2019 and 2016, it wasn't really to catch violators in that particular sense, right? Because the regulations that we came out with were reporting requirements. We wanted them to report the expenditures they were making. So parang wala namang huli doon eh, right? Ang huli doon is if they reported and number one, mali yung report, or they reported and it turns out they overspent, right? So no one overspent. Big surprise, right? No one overspent. Number two, for the most part, their reports were accurate. Their reports tracked what we knew of their exposure online. So again, yung concept ng huli because there's an active violation or an ongoing violation, it sort of doesn't work that way for that set of regulations.
But Director, do you plan on working with tech platforms in terms of beefing up your efforts in terms of regulating social media campaigning, or for even in past elections, misinformation, disinformation, fake news
Well, we
have become a
want
problem?
right. You're absolutely right about that. Misinformation, disinformation, these are big problems. And we do plan to team up. We do plan to enter into strategic partnerships with tech professionals, with industry professionals, no? Individuals who are motivated to do their part in helping ensure clean elections. We are absolutely open to partnerships with them. As far as the big tech companies are concerned, they have always been very open to help with the Comelec to the extent that they are able to. Okay. The problem is that, of course, these are businesses. They have their own corporate interests, and I guess for the most part, they're not even here in the Philippines, right? There is one major tech company that doesn't even have a representative in the Philippines, I was told. But there have been there are other platforms that have people here, and we are already talking to them. So there is this relationship. There's also news of certain tools, online social media campaigning tools that were available in the US in the last elections, and that I recently have found out might be already available here in the Philippines. So there's a lot of work to establish these relationships and explore these new tools, and we're starting to do that now.
So definitely we can say na the 2022 elections will see a different kind of effort from Comelec that we haven't seen in years past.
I think we can say that of everyone because of the pandemic. A lot of these things are happening on an accelerated timetable. These are the things that you're supposed to be able to do over a longer period of time. But now, because of the pandemic, you're forced to do it in the 1 year that you have left before elections. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of changes. There's going to be a lot of new things coming up, and everyone is just really struggling to stay on the cutting edge of everything.
And Director, this thing I have to bring up also. In social media and even offline, some personalities and groups have been red baited or have been subjected to red tagging. And I've talked recently to election watchdog Contra Daya, which is urging Comelec to take a more solid stand against red baiting or red tagging. Is this something that we can expect from Comelec?
What do you want us to do? You want us to scold people for saying what they say? I mean, doesn't that seem like it falls outside the core competence of the Comelec? The Comelec is to run the elections. It's not to police the behavior of people. There are other mechanisms for that. I would be very happy to talk to Contradaya to find out exactly what they mean about that, what they exactly had in mind. But to say something as vague as Comelec should take a more solid stance, what solid stance? What is the Comelec empowered to do by existing law to address this particular concern? That's a very curious suggestion. And again, this is not to say that it's being dismissed outright, but I would like to hear more about it from Contrataya, because again, it would seem to me that this falls outside the ambit of what Comelec is supposed to do, right? I don't see how this would fall within the authorities and the powers already exercised by the Comelec.
Siguro, Director, a way to reframe the question, what does Comelec think na lang of efforts by the Duterte administration to disqualify groups, left-leaning groups, which are accused of having ties to the communist movement?
How has it ever been illegal or questionable to seek the disqualification of anyone from running for office? Okay, I understand that this is a very, very controversial thing to talk about, but at bottom, this is an effort to disqualify someone, right? Or some people. This is the same thing that happens every single time anyone files a certificate of candidacy. How is this different? Okay, you can argue that this is different because this is the government bringing down the full weight of government against some people. Fine. But is this really the forum for fairness, Comelec? Is Comelec really going to be equipped to say, you're being a bully, because unless they're violating some law, being willing to exercise legal authority, being willing to take advantage of existing laws, existing procedures, that can't be questionable, right? That can't be questionable. Again, absent any clear showing of abuse of power, right? You and I may disagree with the goal, but if the process being followed is legal, it conforms with the legal protections created by law, then there's really very little we can do, right? So to take the government to task for wanting some people out of the game, that would be beyond the scope of what Comelec is authorized to do.
But so far, Director, what disqualification cases, have been lodged by the government, and what has the Comelec done about them?
I'm only familiar with one, and as far as the question of what has the Comelec done about them, we've done exactly what we do with all similar cases, which is to adhere to the process, right? So I don't know what to say, man. I don't know what you want me to say. Someone filed the case. Someone filed the case. The case was raffled to a division. The division started issuing orders, or setting hearings, that sort of thing. And that's what happens on a regular basis.
And now, moving on to another topic, Director. This one you've always, and you've answered this several times, but people are asking Comelec to do something about Apple politicians. Can the Comelec really do something about it?
No, as far as Apple politicians are concerned, it's very instructive if people were to take the effort to read Peñera versus Comelec, because that's really the case that defines this whole problem of Apple in politics, no? And basically, Peñera settled the question of whether or not the existing laws created a loophole. Okay, so long story short, yes, that's what Peñera did. Peñera established that there is a loophole. And what did the Supreme Court say in Peñera that is so instructive? The Supreme Court in Peñera said, yes, we understand that our ruling opens a loophole. I'm paraphrasing. Opens a loophole in the law that will allow this behavior to continue unabated. But there is nothing we can do about it, the Supreme Court said. There is nothing the Supreme Court can do about it because the law is clear. If the Supreme Court cannot do anything about it, what do you think the Comelec can do? Even less, right? So that's the long and short of it. Unfortunately, that answer is nowhere near satisfying to anyone. It's not satisfying to me personally, but reality bites. That's the way it is, and that's what the Supreme Court said. Now, having said that, what's even suckier is that case is old, man. It's old. 2013 pa yan ata. So it's been more than 5 years, and still Congress has not done anything about it, right? And that's the bigger problem.
Director James, I've been seeing your social media posts, your tweets, and you've been quite vocal, expressing your frustration with the country's situation in terms of pandemic response. You even went on saying that the pandemic is an important reason for the people to exercise their right to vote in
Absolutely.
2022. So what is your
Absolutely.
message out there to voters who have been discouraged by the electoral process?
My message to voters is this: look around you. If you're happy with what you're seeing, vote to keep it in place. But if you're unhappy with the experiences that you've been having in this pandemic, if you're not satisfied with the way you've been treated by this government, then vote to change things. Because ultimately, that's what the elections are all about. The elections are all about making sure that the future course of the nation agrees with what you believe. It's a course correction in the most accurate sense, right? It's a way of making sure that the government goes this way instead of that the government pays more attention to this issue instead of that. And the only way you can do that with any sort of reliable efficacy is to participate in the elections. So ultimately, yan ang pinakamahalagang mensahe. Meron tayong halalan sa darating na taon. Makilahok, makialam, at maging bahagi ng kasaysayan para na rin sa kaibabuti ng iyong bansa.
I think it's a good way to end our show. Thank you very much, Director James Jimenez, and we hope to have you again in our future shows.
No problem. I enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.